Hi, everybody. Now, I know you won't believe this just to look at me, but I've actually been writing for about 35 years. And if you're interested, I thought I'd share some tips I found useful to help craft my writing and tips that might be helpful to other writers or aspiring writers out there. I think it's really good to get a, a list of useful tips put together. So that's what I've done. Some of these I picked up from just my own thinking and revision over the years, and some I've learned from other writers. So these are my top 20 tips to get the best finished product you can in writing. The first one is read and write regularly. Reading widely helped you internalize good storytelling or your nonfiction prose. It expands your vocabulary, and it gives you a better idea of what sort of things you might want to be putting onto your page. And of course, writing regularly helps you find your voice and improve your craft. There's nothing like good practice and consistent practice to help with that. So that's number one, read and write regularly. Number two, write with empathy for your reader. I think a target audience is a bit overstated, is an overstated concept, I think. But always keep in mind who you're writing for and what they might feel, think, and need from your writing. Anticipate their questions, their confusions, and their emotions as they read what you've written. Writing, it's a form of communication, so prioritize clarity and connection, and avoid jargon too, and unnecessarily complex language, especially in nonfiction. Simpler language is almost always better. Jargon and long, unfamiliar words or overly complex sentence structures, they're going to likely alienate the reader unless you absolutely must use it for some kind of technical term, then try not to. There's a line I learned, I can't remember who said it, but whenever possible, write so the reader cannot possibly misunderstand what you're saying. That's number two. Number three is write in moderation. We tend to suffer from diminishing returns after a few hours of writing, just as we do in a lot of things, diminishing returns. As time goes on, things get less effective, and we become less effective usually. So take some good breaks to enable the brain to process and return pressure, because the brain and the subconscious particularly does some terrific things in the time away from the screen. So don't over don't overdo it, because you're gonna the more you do it, in longer durations, the less effective usually the latter part of the process is in any one session. So number four, if you're addressing a complex issue, especially in non-fiction prose or academic papers, you should be able to summarize your argument in a couple of paragraphs. It might be a whole paper, it might be a whole chapter, or it might be a long part of a chapter. But if you're going to explain something that's medium to highly complex, explain it in simple terms, as I said in number two, but make sure you have it nailed in its most simplistic form, at least in your head first, such that you could easily summarize it, say, on the back of an envelope. So if it's a 2 or 3 thousand word argument, you want to be able to summarize it on the back of an envelope in your mind, so you are clear that what you're writing is correct. And if you can't truncate it that much, the chances are you need to do more work on it. Then, once you've written it on the back of an envelope or able to, make sure it's clear and simple enough so that a teenager not apprised in the subject very well can understand it, at least in its basic form. I'd say teenager, just somebody who's a novice coming into a subject who hasn't got any prior experience of it. You want your argument to be succinct enough in summary to be able to be put onto a back of an envelope, and you want somebody who's a novice in that particular field to be able to at least understand the principal argument you're making, and that will really enrich your writing. So number five, omit needless words, or as the great Sol Symes said, trim the fat. Try to reduce your first draft by 10 to 15%. You'll find that you mostly can do that. They call it killing your darlings, don't they? In the business. Seriously, don't become seduced by extraneous or superfluous sentences or paragraphs just because they're yours, just because you like the fact that you wrote them and they look good in your mind. If they don't retain necessity for the reader, especially in non-fiction, you actually owe it to the reader to remove them. It's one of the biggest challenges, but yeah, get it down to as fewer words as possible. It'll be much more beneficial to the reader and more enriched when you take out everything you can that's not needed and try to be discerning about what really is needed. Get some help from proofreaders and friends who could read it. Number six, I think I heard this one from, I think it was the screenwriter William Goldman. He said, enter a scene as late as possible and leave as early as possible. I love that one. I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory, isn't it? It's part of the process of number five of trimming the fat. But imagine that. You imagine all the great scenes from screenplay, from literature, from modern fiction. You know, you don't need to enter the scene until the very latest point possible. That's where it should start, and leave as early as possible because the scene that you're trying to convey and describe will be richer for that. Number seven, yeah, this write as often as possible. I think with nouns and verbs, and avoid too many adjectives and adverbs. Nouns and verbs, they carry the real weight of meaning. I think overusing the modifiers like adjectives and adverbs, they tend to make your writing wordy, vague, and actually weaker. Less is more in this. So I don't know, if you said the beautiful sweeping, majestic, towering trees swayed in the breeze. I mean that's an awful sentence. Say the redwoods swayed in the breeze or the pines swayed in the breeze, because redwoods or pines, they already imply the beauty and the majesty and the size of a tree. We know what they look like, so no adjectives really needed. Redwoods swayed in the breeze. It's a much better line than all the unnecessary fat. So yeah, write as often as possible with nouns and verbs. That's my number seven, and that's part of the wisdom of number eight, which is a quite well known one. Show, don't tell. Work out what you want to say, and then do your best not to say it. That's one of the great maxims of literature. Just description. It starts in the writer's creative mind, of course, but it should be transported as much as possible to the readers. You want the reader to be doing most of the interpretation and the description. In other words, don't over describe. Never tell the reader anything if you can show it instead. Don't say, I don't know, she was mad with rage. Say something that shows she was mad with rage. Maybe her fists were clenched or her voice cracked or something, or something like that. Work out what you want to say and then do your best not to say it. That's number eight. Number nine, especially in non-fiction, I think try to avoid footnotes wherever possible. I mean, I write a lot of nonfiction, and footnotes are often a distraction, and you lose your thread as a reader when you look away at a footnote and then back up to where you were in the text. I think for me, try to weave the text into the main paragraph if possible, or just discard it if it's not adding much, if the footnote's not adding much, and try to discern if you think what is contained in the footnote does actually add much. But definitely better to weave it into the main paragraph if there's any danger that the reader won't understand the point you're making without the footnote. Uh, Here's one I really find valuable. I didn't discover this until some way into my writing because it never really occurred to me. But number 10, read your work out loud to hear how it sounds. It really helps. It helps you hear what your eyes might miss. What sounds fine when reading it in your head, you'll find it can sound stiff or unnatural when spoken. The rhythm is different when reading it aloud. So really good tip, I think. Read it out loud. You might also notice typos or misused punctuation when you read it aloud because you can miss some of those things when you're reading it silently as well. So read it aloud. And of course, obviously, this is actually isn't one of the 20, but it sort of goes without saying that you're going to need other people to read your work too. If there are typos, if there are like things to do with accessibility and things like that, there's going to be a point after several drafts and edits where you're not going to pick this stuff up yourself. You're going to need somebody else to proofread it. Hopefully, several people and tell them in advance what you want them to be looking for. Maybe you want someone who's looking for typos. Maybe you want someone for accessibility and style. But yeah, before you give it to anyone, read your work aloud to hear how it sounds. Number 11, there's a quote from a guy called John Gould, and I learned about this in Stephen King's book on writing. It's write with the door closed, rewrite with the door open. So that's a that's a really useful one, I think. What that means is when writing your first draft, it should be just about you, nobody else. The door's closed. Get it down. Don't think about what the audience at this stage or the readers. Just get it down and make it about what you're doing. Keep your first draft private and raw. And then in revision, open the work up to feedback and shape it for your audience. So yeah, write with the door closed and then rewrite it with the door open. Then number 12, there's this idea of the ideal reader, which again I learned from Stephen King in his book on writing, although it's have someone or a few people as your ideal reader, those who you most want to impact and whose opinion you most care about. And I actually I think that the concept of an ideal reader I kind of learned initially from letters written by Evelyn Waugh, the great literary giant who's written some amazing works of literature, but he's also written some brilliant collective letters. And he says, write as though you're writing for your smartest and wittiest friend. And I really that stuck with me. I really like that. Have the ideal reader. And if you're writing non-fiction in which you're making arguments and propositions, just try to consider what your smartest friend or acquaintance would say in response. I think that's really important, actually, particularly with the first edit. Try to imagine what a person you really respect would say and how they would critique it. Because if you can imagine what they would say to improve or to challenge your arguments, then you might find that you can do the work for them in the initial first draft or first edit and tighten it up. Number 13. So regarding style, a good book I'd recommend for style, it's called The Elements of Style by William Strunk. And one of the best pieces of advice for writers in there, I think, is avoid the passive tense. Have conviction in what you say. State what you're stating with confidence. And of course, be confident enough to state it too. Learn what you need to learn, master the craft in order to state it with conviction. Because if you're not able to do that, you shouldn't really be writing what you're writing because, no reader really wants to devote their time to a writer who isn't sure of what they're saying or the reasons they're saying it, especially in non-fiction prose where you're, you know, writing in propositional form, to edify and to enlighten people. So yeah, avoid the passive tense. In terms of paragraph structure, this is number 14. Again, especially in non-fiction, a paragraph should mostly consist of the topic sentence, so introduce the main idea or the question, then the supporting sentences, so provide the evidence, the facts, the explanations backing the idea. It's good then to include prospective counter arguments to show that you understand the reasons why it's good to state or believe what you believe. Acknowledge the opposing views or potential objections and deal with them by explaining why the counter argument doesn't undermine your main point or how it can be reconciled. And then conclude or make a transitional sentence that either summarizes or smoothly moves to the next idea or next paragraph. And number 15, I think by and large, the end of the sentence should be, if not the place of emphasis, it should be a strong place of emphasis, along with the opening. You don't want it to tail off so it's unremarkable. The end of the sentence usually gives more attention and more naturally builds towards a closing payoff. So try to make the last sentence a strong place of emphasis. Number 16. This is what I learned pretty quickly, and I really valued it, especially with how I write and how much I used to write back in the day. When you finish your work, let it sit for several months, ideally, and then return to it. It's fascinating. It's like coming back as a new reader. There you can review it again from a fresh perspective, or certainly a fresher perspective, and you'll find, you'll make further tweaks for the benefit of the book. But it's such a powerful tool to be able to come at something you've written fresh. You sort of rediscover your own work in a less familiar way. It's one of the sweet spots of writing. So I'd really, really recommend that. Letting something sit and then read it again for several months. And if there are deadlines, if you haven't got the luxury of that, then let it sit for as long as you can till you've at least become a bit less familiar, so you can come back as a kind of semi-fresh reader. Now, number 17. Should you even be writing at all? Because there are obviously opportunity costs to all things we do. Everything's a trade-off, and we want to be making the best contributions we can to society. And you don't want to waste time being a mediocre writer if you could be a brilliant something else. And I think I'd say you can't make a good writer out of a bad one. It's not that easy, actually. And you certainly, I would say, can't make a great writer out of a mediocre one or even often a good one. I think you can make a good or a better writer out of a hardworking and diligent writer if you're reasonably competent to start with, a kind of natural competence. I think if you're a bad writer, then quite often practice, persistence, and discipline, it might make you a slightly less bad writer, but it's highly unlikely you'll be a good one, and almost impossible you'll be a very good one, I think. But that's okay. As I say, most of us are not going to be good at most things. So try to pursue what your natural talents are, what you feel your inclinations are, based on what you're good at. Um, and equally, while there'll be many good writers, there are lots of good writers out there. It's pretty hard to go from being merely a good writer to a great writer. In many cases, it's not really possible. Great writers, they don't just write well, they write in a way that almost no one else can write. It might be due to tone and subject and rhythm and perspective. They have this raw instinct for writing that just, few people possess. A great writer sees the world with it might be emotional clarity that most don't have, expresses it in unexpected ways where you think, wow, that's just a great way to express things. They delight in language itself, and they draw stories or insights from, you know, things that other people don't. And I think given that writing is an extension of thinking, I think great writers are really, I think, simply great thinkers in whatever style or craft they're putting it to paper. Although, of course, I think you can be a great thinker and still be a bad writer, of course. So bear that in mind too. Um, Number 18, I wanted to share something that I got from Charles Bukowski in So You Want to Be a Writer, it's called. He alerted in me this sort of salutary reminder of how working on a book should feel at its best. When you're hot on topic, the creativity could be the writing or the editing. It's flowing out, particularly the writing. You're producing the best stuff that's inside of you. You feel like it's sort of coming, bursting out. You know, I think he says unasked out of your heart, I think is the terminology he uses. Comes out of your soul like a rocket, I think is the other one. It's burning in your gut. If what you're working on doesn't elicit those things, it might just be time to put it aside for a bit and work on something else or do something else that does stir those passions. But yeah, at its best, I think that Bukowski coming from the gut is really a good sign, and that's when often the best writing comes. So if it's not coming, don't artificially force it. You know, Number 19. This is a bit niche for me, I think, because I've had the luxury of this with my part-time writing and not in any hurry to get things finished. But if you're not in a hurry, the time over the months and years to keep coming back and adding new things to your prose, particularly your non-fiction, but also fiction too, and take out stuff as well to keep the word count at the right sort of word count. It it's your work undergoing a kind of Darwinian selection, and it's a bit like extra spices in a sausage roll, say that's already going to taste good. You're just adding a few more flavors, and you have the luxury and the time to do that. So I think a work that has the luxury and the time to keep undergoing this Darwinian process is likely to be better for it. Lastly, number 20, this is just a bit of a lifestyle observation that I found helpful. I don't know if it's helpful for everyone. It's certainly been helpful to me. But one of the things I've really benefited from is the trifecta of I've been going to bed and getting up at roughly the same time each day. That's really had positive cognitive benefits, I think. Um, have a good breakfast and write early in the morning if the morning is your time. For me, my brain's at its sharpest just after breakfast in the morning with a good night's sleep. So it might be, if you're a morning person, that's good for you. You might be a night owl who does your best work, when everyone's gone to bed. But yeah, just treat your treat your mind and body well, and attached to that is the basics like drinking lots of water throughout the day. That really helps, and getting plenty of exercise. Those things are great for the brain. So yeah, those are my 20. tips that I've accumulated in my head over the years. So I hope that was helpful. And if you have any of your own that I haven't thought of that you'd like to share, please do share in the comments. And in the description, you'll see a link to my blog and my other work. So thank you so much for watching or listening. And yeah, if you want to like and subscribe, that'd be really appreciated. If you enjoyed what you heard, and please feel free to share too if you think it would help other writers. So thanks for listening and watching, and I'll catch you next time. Thank you.